Hello, you're listening to Comment Below and Let Me Know reading time. This week we're going to be reading The Enchanted Wood. The Enchanted Wood is a story by Enid Blyton, and today it is going to be read by Francois T. The Enchanted Wood, Chapter 1, How They Found the Magic Wood. One moment. There were once 3 children called Joe, Bessie, and Fanny. All their lives they had lived in a town, but now their father had a job in the country, so they were all to move as soon as ever they could. "What fun to be in the country," said Joe. "I shall learn about birds and animals." "And I shall pick as many flowers as I want to," said Bessie. "And I shall have a garden of my own," said Fanny. When the day came for the move, all the children were excited. A small van came to their door, and 2 men helped their father and mother to pile everything into it. When it was full, the van drove away, and the children put on their coats and hats to go out with their father and mother to catch a train at the station. "Now we're off," cried Joe. The country," sang Bessie. "We might see fairies there," said Fanny. The train whistled and chuffed out of the station. The children pressed their noses to the window and watched the dirty houses and the tall chimneys race by. How they hated the town! How lovely it would be to be in the clean country with flowers growing everywhere and birds singing in the hedges. "We might have some adventures in the country," said Joe. "There will be streams and hillsides, big fields and dark woods. Oh, it will be lovely." "You won't have any more adventures in the country than you will have in the town," said their father. "I dare say you will find it all very dull." But that's where he was quite wrong. My goodness, the things that happened to those children. They arrived at last at the tiny station where they were to get out. A sleepy-looking porter put their 2 bags on a barrow and said he would bring them along later. Off they all went, down the winding country lane, chattering loudly. "I wonder what our cottage will be like," said Bessie. "And I wonder if we've got a garden," said Fanny. But long before they reached their new home, they were tired out and could not bother to say a word more to each other. Their cottage was 5 miles from the station, and as the children's father could not afford to do anything but walk there, it seemed a very long way indeed. There was no bus to take them, so the tired children dragged their feet along, wishing for a cup of milk and a cosy bed. At last they got there, and dear me, it was worth all the walk, for the cottage was sweet. Roses hung from the walls, red and white and pink, and honeysuckle was all around the front door. It was lovely. The van was at the door, and the 2 men were moving all the furniture into the little house. Father helped, whilst Mother went to light the kitchen fire and make them all a hot drink. They were so tired that they could do nothing but drink hot milk, eat a few biscuits, and tumble into their roughly made beds. Joe looked out of the window, but he was too sleepy to see properly. In 1 minute, the 2 girls in their small room were asleep, and Joe too, in his even tinier room. What fun it was to wake up in the morning and see the sun shining in the strange windows. It didn't take Joe, Bessie, and Fanny very long to dress. Then they were out in the little garden, running through the grass that had grown so long and smelling the roses that grew all around. Mother cooked eggs for them, and they ate their breakfast hungrily. "It's lovely to be in the country," said Joe, looking out of the window to the faraway hills. "We can grow vegetables in the garden," said Bessie. "There will be glorious walks all round," said Fanny. That day everyone helped to get the little house straight and tidy. Father was going to work the next day. Mother hoped there would be someone to give her washing to do. Then she would make enough money to buy a few hens. That would be lovely. I shall collect the eggs each morning and evening, said. That is like, said Joe. Can you spare us for an hour, Mother? Yes, run along, said Mother. So off the three children went, out of the tiny white front gate and into the lane. They explored all roundabout. They ran across a field where pink clover was full of bees. They paddled in a small brown stream that chattered away to itself under the willow trees in the sunshine. And then they suddenly came to the wood. It was not far from their cottage at the back. It looked quite an ordinary wood, except that the trees were a darker green than usual. A narrow ditch separated the wood from the overgrown lane. A wood, said Bessie in delight. We shall be able to have picnics here. It's rather a mysterious sort of wood, said Joe thoughtfully. Don't you think so, Bessie? Well, the trees are rather thick, but they seem about the same as any others, said Bessie. They don't quite, said Fanny. The noise the leaves make is different. Listen. They listened, and Fanny was right. The leaves of the trees in the wood did not rustle in quite the same way as other trees nearby did. It's almost as if they were really talking to one another, said Bessie, whispering secrets, real secrets that we just can't understand. It's a magic wood, said Fanny suddenly. Nobody said anything. They stood and listened. Wisha, 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 said the wood, and bent towards one another in a very friendly way. There might be fairy folk in there, said Bessie. Shall we jump over the ditch and go in? No, said Joe. We might get lost. Let's find our way around before we go into big woods like this. Joe, Bessie, Fanny, suddenly came their mother's voice from the cottage not far off. Tea time, tea time. The children felt hungry all at once. They forgot the queer wood and ran back to their new home. Mother had new bread with strawberry jam for them, and they ate a whole loaf between them. Father came in as they were finishing. He had been shopping for Mother in the village 3 miles away, and he was hungry and tired. We've been exploring everywhere, Father, said Bessie, pouring him out a big cup of tea. We found a lovely wood, said Fanny. It's a queer sort of wood, said Joe. The trees really seem to be talking to one another, Father. That must be the wood I've heard about this afternoon, said Father. It has a strange name, children. What's it called? Asked Joe. It's called the Enchanted Wood, said their father. People don't go there if they can help it. It's funny to hear things like that nowadays, and I don't expect there is really anything very queer about the wood, but just to be careful not to go far into it in case you get lost. The children looked in excitement at one another. The Enchanted Wood, what a lovely name! And each child secretly thought the same thought. I shall go and explore the Enchanted Wood as soon as ever I can. Their father set them to work in the overgrown garden. After tea, Joe had to pull up the tough thistles, and the two girls had to weed the untidy vegetable bed. They spoke to one another in joyful voices. The Enchanted Wood, we knew there was something queer about it. I guess there were fairies there, said Fanny. Well, we'll do some more exploring as soon as we can, cried Bessie. We'll find out what those whispering trees are saying. We'll know all the secrets of the wood before many weeks are past. And that night, at bedtime, all three stood at the window, looking out on the dark, whispering wood behind the cottage. What would they find in the Enchanted Wood? Chapter 2. First Visit to the Wood. The three children had no chance to visit the Enchanted Wood until the next week, because they had to help their mother and father all they could. There was the garden to get tidy, curtains to sew for the house, and a great deal of cleaning to be done. Sometimes Joe was free and could have gone by himself. Sometimes the girls were sent out for a walk, but Joe was busy. None of them wanted to go without the others, so they had to wait. And then at last their chance came. "You can take your tea out today," said Mother. "You've worked well, all of you, and you deserve a picnic. I'll cut you some sandwiches, and you can take a bottle of milk." "We'll go to the wood," whispered Bessie to the others, and with excited faces and beating hearts, they helped their mother to pack their tea into a big basket. They set off. There was a small gate at the bottom of their back garden that led into the overgrown lane run by the wood. They unlatched the gate and stood in the lane. They could see the trees in the wood and hear them talking their strange tree talk. "Wisha, wisha, wisha, wisha." "I feel as if there are adventures about," said Joe. "Come on, over the ditch we go, and into the enchanted wood." One by one, the children jumped over the narrow ditch. They stood beneath the trees and peered about. Small freckles of sunshine lay here and there on the ground, but not very many, for the trees were so thick. It was dim and green there, and a small bird nearby sang a queer little song over and over again. "It really is magic," said Franny suddenly. "I can feel magic about somewhere. Can't you, Bessie? Can't you, Joe?" "Yes," said the others, and their eyes shone with excitement. "Come on." They went down a little green path that looked as if it had been made for rabbits. It was so small and narrow. "Don't let's go too far," said Joe. "We'd better wait till we know the paths a bit better before we go deep into the wood. Look out for a good place to sit down and have our sandwiches, girls." "I can see some wild strawberries," cried Bessie. And she knelt down and pressed back some pretty leaves, showing the others deep red strawberries below. "Let's pick some and have them for tea too," said Fanny. So they picked hard and soon had enough to make a fine meal. "Let's sit down under that old oak tree over there," said Joe. "It's all soft moss beneath. It will be like sitting on a green velvet cushion." So they sat down and undid their sandwiches. Soon they were munching away happily, listening to the dark green leaves overhead saying "wisha, wisha" all the time. And it was whilst they were in the middle of their tea that they saw a very peculiar thing. Fanny noticed it first. Not far off was a clear piece of soft grass. As Fanny looked at it, she noticed bumps appearing on it. She stared in surprise. The bumps grew. The earth rose up and broke in about 6 places. "Oh, look," said Fanny in a low voice, pointing to the piece of grass. "What's happening over there?" All three watched in silence, and then they saw what it was. 6 big toadstools were growing quickly up from the ground, pushing their way through and rising up steadily. "I've never seen that happen before," said Joe in astonishment. "Shh," said Bessie. "Don't make a noise. I can hear footsteps." The others listened. Sure enough, they heard the sound of pattering feet and little high voices. "Let's get quickly behind a bush," said Bessie suddenly. "Whoever it is that is coming will be frightened if they see us. There's magic happening here, and we want to see it." They scrambled up and crept quickly behind a thick bush, taking their basket with them. They hid just in time, for even as Bessie settled down and parted the leaves of the bush to peek through, there came a troop of small men with long beards almost reaching the ground. "Brownies," whispered Joe. The brownies went to the toadstools and sat down on them. They were holding a meeting. One of them had a bag with him, which he put down behind this toadstool. The children could not hear what was being said, but they heard the sound of chattering voices and caught 1 or 2 words. Suddenly Joe nudged Bessie and Fanny. He had seen something else. The girls saw it too. An ugly, gnome-like fellow was creeping up silently behind the meeting on the toadstools. None of the brownies saw him or heard him. "He's after that bag," whispered Joe. And so he was. He reached out a long arm. His bony fingers closed on the bag. He began to draw it away under a bush. Joe jumped up. He was not going to watch people being robbed without saying something. He shouted loudly, "Stop, thief! Hi, look at that gnome behind you!" In a fright, the brownies all leapt up. The gnome jumped to his feet and sped off with the bag. The brownies stared after him in dismay, not one of them following him. The robber ran towards the children's bush. He didn't know they were there. As quick as lightning, Joe put out his foot and tripped up the running gnome. Down he went. Crash! The bag flew from his hand, and Bessie picked it up and threw it to the astonished brownies, who were still standing by the toadstools. Joe tried to grab the gnome, but he was up and off like a bird. The children tore after him. In between the trees they went, dodging here and there, and at last they saw the gnome leap up to the low branches of a great tree and pull himself into the leaves. The children sank down at the bottom, out of breath. "Oh, we've got him now," said Joe. "He can't get down without being caught." "Here are the brownies coming," said Bessie, wiping her hot forehead. The little bearded men ran up and bowed. "You are very good to us," said the biggest one. "Thank you for saving our bag. We have valuable papers in there." "We've got the gnome for you too," said Joe, as he pointed up into the tree. "He went up there. If you surround the tree and wait, you will be able to catch him as he comes down." But the brownies would not come too near the tree. They looked half frightened of it. "He will not come down until he wants to," said the biggest brownie. "That is the oldest and most magical tree in the world. It is the Faraway tree." "The Faraway tree?" said Bessie in wonder. "What a queer name! Why do you call it that?" "It's a very strange tree," said another brownie. "Its top reaches the faraway places in a way we don't understand. Sometimes its top branches may be in witchland, sometimes in lovely countries, sometimes in peculiar places that no one has ever heard of. We never climb it because we never know what might be at the top." "How very strange," said the children. "The gnome has gone into whatever place there is at the top of the tree today," said the biggest brownie. "He may live there for months and never come down again. It's no good waiting for him, and it's certainly no good going after him. His name is Creepy, because he is forever creeping about quietly." The children looked up into the broad leafy boughs of the tree. They felt tremendously excited. The faraway tree in the enchanted wood. Oh, what magic there seemed to be in the very names. "If only we could climb up," said Joe longingly. "You must never do that," said the brownies at once. "It's dangerous. We must go now, but we do thank you for your help. If you ever want us to help you, just come into the enchanted wood and whistle 7 times under the oak tree, not far from our toadstools." "Thank you," said the children, and stared after the 6 small brownies as they ran off between the trees. Joe thought it was time to go home, so they followed the little men down the narrow green path until they came to the part of the wood they knew. They picked up their basket and went home, all of them thinking the same thought. "We must go up the faraway tree and see what is at the top." Chapter 3. Up the Faraway Tree. The children did not tell their father and mother about the happenings in the enchanted wood, for they were so afraid that they might be forbidden to go there. But when they were alone, they talked about nothing else. "When do you suppose we could go up the faraway tree?" Franny kept asking. "Oh, do let's go, Joe." Joe wanted to go very badly, but he was a little afraid of what might happen, and he knew that he ought to look after his 2 sisters and see that no harm ever came to them. Just suppose they all went up the faraway tree and never came back. Then he had an idea. "Listen," he said, "I know what we'll do. We'll climb up the tree and just see what is at the top. We don't need to go there. We can just look. We'll wait till we have a whole day to ourselves, then we'll go." The girls were so excited. They worked hard in the house, hoping that their mother would say they could have a whole day to themselves. Joe worked hard in the garden too, clearing away all the weeds. Their parents were very pleased. "Would you like to go to the nearest town or have a day there?" asked Mother at last. "No, thank you," said Joe at once. "We've had enough of towns, Mother. What we'd really like is to go and have a whole day picnic in the wood." Very well, said Mother. You can go tomorrow. Father and I are going off for the day to buy some things we need. You can take your dinner and tea and go off by yourselves, if it is fine and sunny. How the children hoped it would be fine. They woke up early and jumped out of bed. They pulled their curtains and looked out. The sky was as blue as cornflowers. The sun shone between the trees, and the shadows lay long and dewy on the grass. The enchanted wood stood dark and mysterious behind their garden. "Oh, lovely, lovely," said Bessie and Fanny as they flung on their clothes. "Are you ready, Joe?" They all had breakfast. Their mother cut sandwiches, put cakes into a bag, and 3 biscuits each. She sent Joe to pick some plums from the garden and told Bessie to take 2 bottles of lemonade. The children were most excited. Mother and Father set off to the town. The children waved goodbye from the gate. Then they tore indoors to get their hats and the bag in which the food had been put. They slammed the cottage door. Oh, adventures were in the air that morning. "Up the faraway tree, Joe, Bessie and me," sang Fanny loudly. "Hush," said Joe. "We are not far from the enchanted wood. We don't want anyone to know what we are going to do." They ran down the back garden and out of the little gate at the end. They stood still in the overgrown, narrow lane and looked at one another. It was the first big adventure of their lives. What were they going to see? What were they going to do? They jumped over the ditch into the wood. At once they felt different. Magic was round them. The birds' songs sounded different. The trees once again whispered secretly to one another, "Wisha, wisha, wisha, wisha." "Oh," said Fanny, shivering with delight, "it feels lovely." "Come on," said Joe, going down the green path. "Let's find the faraway tree." They followed him. He went on till he came to the oak tree under which they had sat before. There were the 6 toadstools too, on which the brownies had held their meeting, though the toadstools looked rather brown and old now. "Which is the way now?" said Bessie, stopping. None of them knew. They set off down a little path, but they soon stopped, for they came to a strange place where the trees stood so close together that they could go no further. They went back to the oak tree. "Let's go this way," said Bessie. So they set off in a different direction. But this time they came to a curious pond, whose waters were pale yellow and shone like butter. Bessie didn't like the look of the pond at all, and they all 3 went back once more to the oak tree. "Oh, this is too bad," said Fanny, almost crying. "Just when we've got a whole day to ourselves, we can't find the tree." "I'll tell you what we'll do," said Joe suddenly. "We'll call those brownies. Don't you remember how they said they would help us whenever we needed them?" "Of course," said Fanny. "We had to stand under this oak tree and whistle 7 times. "Go on, Joe, whistle," said Bessie. So Joe stood beneath the thick green leaves of the old oak and whistled loudly 7 times. The children waited. In about half a minute, a rabbit popped its head out of a nearby rabbit hole and stared at them. "What do you want?" said the rabbit in a furry sort of voice. The children stared in surprise. They had never heard an animal speak before. The rabbit put its ears up and down and spoke again, rather crossly. "Are you deaf? What do you want?" it said. We want one of the brownies," said Joe, finding his tongue at last. The rabbit turned and called down his hole, "Mr. Whiskers, Mr. Whiskers, there's someone waiting for you." There came a voice shouting something in answer, and then one of the 6 brownies squeezed out of the rabbit hole and stared at the children. "Sorry to be so long," he said, "but one of the rabbit's children has the measles, and I was down seeing to it." "I didn't think rabbits got the measles," said Bessie, astonished. "They've more often got the weasels," said Mr. Whiskers. "Weasels are even more catching than measles as far as rabbits are concerned." He grinned as if he'd made a huge joke, but as the children had no idea that weasels were savage little animals that caught rabbits, they didn't laugh. "We wanted to ask you the way to the faraway tree," said Bessie. "We've forgotten it." "I'll take you," said Mr. Whiskers, whose name was really a very good one, for his beard reached his toes. Sometimes he trod on it, and this jerked his head downwards suddenly. Bessie kept wanting to laugh, but she thought she had better not. She wondered why he didn't tie it around his waist, out of the way of his feet. Mr. Whiskers led the way between the dark trees. At last he reached the trunk of the enormous faraway tree. "Here you are," he said. "Are you expecting someone down it today?" "Well, no," said Joe. "We rather wanted to go up it ourselves." "Go up it yourselves?" said Mr. Whiskers in horror. "Don't be silly. It's dangerous. You don't know what might be at the top. There's a different place almost every day." "Well, we're going," said Joe firmly, and he set his foot against the trunk of the tremendous tree and took hold of a branch up above his head. "Come on, girls." "I shall fetch my brothers and get you down," said Mr. Whiskers in a fright, and he scuttled off crying, "It's so dangerous! It's so dangerous!" "Do you suppose it is all right to go?" asked Bessie, who was usually the sensible one. "Come on, Bessie," said Joe impatiently. "We're only going to see what's at the top. Don't be a baby." "I'm not," said Bessie, and she and Fanny hauled themselves up beside Joe. "It doesn't look very difficult to climb. We'll soon be at the top." But it wasn't as easy as they thought, as you will see. Chapter 4. The Folk in the Faraway Tree. Before very long, the children were hidden in the branches as they climbed upwards. When Mr. Whiskers came back with 5 other brownies, not a child could be seen. "Hey, come down!" yelled the brownies, dancing round the tree. "You'll be captured or lost. This tree is dangerous." Joe laughed and peered down. The faraway tree seemed to be growing acorns just where he was, so he picked one and threw it down. It hit Mr. Whiskers on the hat, and he rushed away shouting, "Oh, someone shot me! Someone shot me!" Then there was silence. "They've gone," said Joe, laughing again. "I expect they're afraid of being shot by acorn bullets. Funny little things. Come on, girls." "This must be an oak tree, if it grows acorns," said Bessie as she climbed. But just as she said that, she stared in surprise at something nearby. It was a prickly chestnut case with conkers inside. "Good gracious," she said. "It's growing horse chestnuts just here. What a very peculiar tree." "Well, let's hope it grows apples and pears higher up," said Fanny with a giggle. "It is a most extraordinary tree." Soon they were high up. When Joe parted the leaves and tried to see out of the tree, he was amazed to find that he was far higher than the tallest trees in the wood. He and the girls looked down on top of all the other trees, which looked like a broad green carpet below. Joe was higher up than the girls. Suddenly, he gave a shout. "I say, girls, come up here by me, quickly. I've found something queer." Bessie and Fanny climbed quickly up. "Why, it's a window in the tree," said Bessie in astonishment. They all peered inside, and suddenly the window was flung open and an angry little face looked out with a nightcap on. "Rude creatures!" shouted the angry little man, who looked like a pixie. "Everybody that climbs the tree peeps in at me. It doesn't matter what I'm doing, there's always someone peeping." The children were too astonished to do anything but stare. The pixie disappeared and came back with a jug of water. He flung it to Bessie and wetted her. She gave a little scream. "Perhaps you won't peep into people's houses next time," said the pixie with a grin, and he slammed his window shut again and drew the curtain. "Well," said Bessie, trying to wipe herself dry with her handkerchief, "what a rude little man." "We'd better not look in any windows we pass," said Joe. "But I was so surprised to see a window in a tree." Bessie soon got dry. They climbed up again and soon had another surprise. They came to a broad branch that led to a yellow door set neatly in the big trunk of the faraway tree. It had a little knocker and a brightly polished bell. The children stared at the door. "I wonder who lives there," said Fanny. "Shall we knock and see?" said Joe. "Well, I don't want water all over me again," said Bessie. "We'll ring the bell and then hide behind this branch," said Joe. "If anyone thinks he is going to throw water at us, he won't find us." So Joe rang the bell, and then they all hid carefully behind a big branch. A voice came from inside the door. "I'm washing my hair. If that's the butcher, please leave a pound of sausages." The children stared at one another and laughed. It was odd to hear of butchers coming up the Faraway tree. The voice shouted again. "If it's the oil man, I don't want anything. If it's the red dragon, he must call again next week." "Good gracious," said Bessie, looking rather frightened. "The red dragon? I don't like the sound of that." At that moment, the yellow door opened and a small elf looked out. Her hair was fluffed out round her shoulders, drying, and she was rubbing it with a towel. She stared at the peeping children. "Did you ring my bell?" she asked. "What do you want?" "We just wanted to see who lived in the funny little tree house," said Joe, peering in at the dark room inside the tree. The elf smiled. She had a very sweet face. "Come in for a moment," she said. "My name is Silky, because of my silky hair. Where are you off to?" "We're climbing up the Faraway tree to see what is at the top," said Joe. "Be careful you don't find something horrid," said Silky, giving each of them a chair in her dark little tree room. "Sometimes there are delightful places at the top of the tree, but sometimes there are queer lands too. Last week there was the land of Hippity Hop, which was dreadful. As soon as you got there, you have to hop on one leg, and everything went hippity hop, even the trees. Nothing ever kept still. It was most tiring." "It does sound exciting," said Bessie. "Where's our food, Joe? Let's ask Silky to share some with us." Silky was pleased. She sat there brushing her beautiful golden hair and ate sandwiches with them. She brought out a tin of pop biscuits, which were lovely. As soon as you bit into them, they went pop, and you suddenly found your mouth filled with new honey from the middle of the biscuits. Fanny took 7, one after another, for she was rather greedy. Bessie stopped her. "You'll go pop if you eat any more," she said. "Do a lot of people live in this tree?" asked Joe. "Yes, heaps," said Silky. "They move in and out, you know. But I'm always here, and so is the angry pixie down below." "Yes, we've seen him," said Bessie. "Who else is there?" "Well, let's see. There's Mr. What's-his-name above me," said Silky. "Nobody knows his name, and he doesn't know it himself, so he's called Mr. What's-his-name. Don't wake him if he's asleep. He might chase you. Then there's Dame Wash-a-Lot. She's always washing, and as she pours her water away down the tree, you've got to look out for waterfalls." "This is a most interesting and exciting tree," said Bessie, finishing her cake. "Joe, I think we ought to go. I think we ought to go now, or we'll never get to the top. Goodbye, Silky. We'll come and see you again one day." "Do," said Silky. "I'd like to be friends." They all left the dear little round room in the tree and began to climb once more. Not long after, they'd heard a peculiar noise somewhere. It sounded like an aeroplane throbbing and roaring. "But that can't be an aeroplane in this tree," said Joe. He peered all around, and then he saw what was making the noise. A funny old gnome sat in a desk chair on a broad branch, his mouth wide open, his eyes fast shut, snoring hard. "It's Mr. What's-his-name," said Bessie. "Gracious, what a noise he makes! Mind we don't waken him." "Shall I put a cherry in his mouth and see what happens?" asked Joe, who was always ready for a bit of mischief. The faraway tree was growing cherries all round for a change, and there were plenty to pick. "No, Joe, no," said Bessie. "You know what Silky said. He might chase us. I don't want to fall out of the faraway tree and bump down from bough to bough if you do. So they all crept past Mr. What's-his-name and went on climbing up and up. For a long time, nothing happened except that the wind blew in the tree. The children did not pass any more houses or windows in the tree, and then they heard another noise, rather a peculiar one. They listened. It sounded like a waterfall, and suddenly Joe guessed what it was. "It's Dame Washalot's throwing out her dirty water," he yelled. "Look out, Bessie! Look out, Fanny!" Down the trunk of the tree poured a lot of blue, soapy water. Joe dodged it. Fanny slipped under a broad branch, but poor old Bessie got well splashed from head to foot. How she shouted! The folk in the faraway tree, Joe and Fanny, had to lend her their hankies. "I am most unlucky," sighed Bessie. That's twice I've been wetted today." Up they went again, passing more little doors and windows, but seeing no one else, and at last they saw above them a vast white cloud. "Look," said Joe in amazement. "The cloud has a hole in it, and the branches go up, and I believe we're at the very top of the tree. Shall we creep through the cloud hole and see what's above?" "Let's!" cried Bessie and Fanny. So up they went. Chapter 5. The Roundabout Land. One big, broad branch slanted upwards at the top of the faraway tree. Joe climbed onto it and looked down, but he could see nothing, for a white mist swirled around and about. Above him, the enormous, thick white cloud stretched, with a purple hole in it through which the topmost branch of the faraway tree disappeared. The children felt tremendously excited. At last they were at the very top. Joe carefully pulled himself up the last branch. He disappeared into the purple hole. Bessie and Fanny followed him. The branch came to an end, and a little ladder ran through the cloud. Up the children went, and before they knew what had happened, there they were, out in the sunshine, in a new and very strange land. They stood on green grass. Above them was a blue sky. A tune was playing somewhere, going on and on and on. "It's sort of the tune a roundabout plays, Joe," said Bessie, "isn't it?" It was. And then, suddenly, without any warning at all, the whole land began to swing round. The children almost fell over, so suddenly did the swing round begin. "Good gracious!" said Bessie, frightened. "What's happening?" The children felt terribly giddy, for trees, distant houses, hills, and bushes began to move round. They too felt themselves moving, for the grass was going round as well. They looked for the hole in the cloud, but it had disappeared. "The whole land is going round and round like a roundabout," cried Joe, shutting his eyes with giddiness. "We've passed over the hole in the clouds. We don't know where the topmost branch of the faraway tree is now. It's somewhere beneath this land, but goodness knows where." "Joe, but how can we get back home again?" cried Fanny in fright. "We'll have to ask someone for help," said Joe. The three began to walk away from the patch of green field in which they were standing. Bessie noticed that they had been standing on a ring of grass that seemed darker than the grass around. She wondered why it was, but she had no time to say anything, for really it was dreadfully difficult to walk properly in a land that was going round and round like a proper roundabout all the time. The music went on and on too. Hurdy-gurdy, hurdy-gurdy. Joe wondered where it came from, and where the machinery was that worked the strange roundabout land. Soon they met a tall man singing loudly from a book. Joe stopped him, but he went on singing. It was annoying. "Hi-diddle-ho, diddle, derry-derry down," shouted the man, while Joe tried to make himself heard. "How can we get away from this land?" Joe shouted. "Don't interrupt me." "Hi-diddle-ho, diddle," sang the man, and he beat time with his finger. Joe caught hold of the bony finger and shouted again, "Which is the way out of this land, and what land is it?" "Now you've made me lose my time," said the tall man crossly. "I shall have to begin my song again." "What is this land, please?" asked Fanny. "It's Roundabout land," said the tall man. "I should have thought anyone would have guessed that. You can't get away from it. It goes round and round always, and only stops once in a blue moon." "There must have been a blue moon when we climbed into it," groaned Joe. "It had certainly stopped then." The man went off, singing loudly, "Hi diddle ho diddle derry derry down." "Silly old diddle derry," said Fanny. "Really, we do seem to meet the most peculiar people." "What I'm most worried about is getting home," said Bessie. "Mother will be anxious if we are not back when she is. What shall we do, Joe?" "Let's sit down under this tree and have a bit more to eat," said Joe. So they sat down and munched solemnly, hearing the roundabout music going on all the time and watching the distant hills and trees swinging round against the sky. It was all very strange. Presently, a pair of rabbits lolloped up and looked at the children. Fanny loved animals, and she threw a bit of a cake to them. To her surprise, one of the rabbits picked up the cake in its paw and nibbled it like a monkey. "Thanks," said the rabbit. "It's a change from grass. Where do you come from? We haven't seen you before, and we thought we knew everyone here. Nobody new ever comes to Roundabout Land." "And nobody ever gets away," said the other rabbit, smiling at Fanny and holding out its paw for a bit of cake too. "Really?" said Bessie in alarm. "Well, we are new to it, for we only came up about an hour ago. We came up the Faraway tree." "What?" cried both rabbits at once, flipping up their long ears in amazement. "Up the Faraway tree, did you say? Goodness, you don't mean to say it's touching this land?" "Yes, it is," said Bessie, "but I expect as this land is swinging round and round, that the topmost branch might be almost anywhere underneath it. There's no way of finding out." "Oh, yes, there is," said the first rabbit excitedly. "If we burrow down a little way and make a hole, we can see whereabouts the faraway tree is underneath, and we can wait for it to come round again when the land swings above it." "Well, we came up from the tree just where the grass is rather darker than the rest," said Bessie. "I noticed that. Do you suppose that as the roundabout land swings around, it will come back to the same place?" "Of course," said the rabbits. "We can easily burrow down the green patch of grass and wait for the land to turn round just over the tree again. Come on, quickly, there's no time to lose." All of them jumped up and sped off. Bessie knew the way, and so did the rabbits. Soon they were back in the field where the ring of grass, dark grass, stood. There was no opening now, leading through a cloud down to the tree. It had gone. The rabbits began to dig quickly. Soon they found the ladder that led upwards. Then they made such a big hole that the children could see down it to the large white cloud that swirled below the roundabout land. "Nothing there yet," said the first rabbit, getting out a handkerchief and wiping his dirty front paws. "We must wait a bit. I only hope the land hasn't swung on and past the faraway tree altogether." The roundabout music went on, and then suddenly it began to slow down. One of the rabbits peeped out of the hole below and gave a shout. "The land has stopped going round, and the faraway tree is just nearby, but we can't reach it." The children peered through the cloud below the ladder and saw quite clearly that the faraway tree was very near, but not near enough to jump on. Whatever were they to do? "Now, don't try to jump," warned the rabbits, "or you'll fall right through the cloud." "But what shall we do?" asked Bessie in despair. "We must get on the tree before we swing away again." "I've got a rope," said one of the rabbits suddenly, and he put his hand into a big pocket and pulled out a yellow rope. He made a loop in one end and then threw it carefully at the topmost branch of the nearby tree. It caught and held. Good. "Fanny, slip down the rope first," said Joe. "I'll hold this end." So Fanny, rather afraid, slid down the yellow rope to the tree. And then, just as she got there, the roundabout music began to play very loudly and quickly, and the roundabout land began to move. "Quick! Quick!" shouted Fanny as the land swung nearer to the faraway tree. "Jump! Jump!" They jumped, and the rabbits jumped after them. The roundabout land swung off. The big white cloud covered everything. The children and the rabbits clung to the topmost branch and looked at one another. "We look like monkeys on a stick," said Joe, and they all began to giggle. "My goodness, what an adventure! I vote we don't come up here again." But as you may guess, they did. Chapter 6. Moonface and the Slippery Slip. The children clung to the top of the branches of the faraway tree, whilst the rabbits slid down a little bit lower. They could still hear the gay music of the roundabout land as it swung round overhead. "We'd better get home," said Joe in a rather quiet voice. "It's been just a bit too exciting." "Come on then," said Bessie, beginning to climb down. "It will be easier to get down than it was to climb up." But Fanny was very tired. She began to cry as she clung to her branch. She was the youngest, and not as strong as Joe and Bessie. I shall fall," she wept. I know I shall fall." Joe and Bessie looked at one another in alarm. This would never do. There was such a long way to fall. "Fanny, dear, you simply must try," said Joe gently. "We've got to get home safely." But Fanny clung to her branch and wept great tears. The two rabbits looked at her most upset. One put his paw into her hand. "I'll help you," he said. But Fanny wouldn't be helped. She was tired out and afraid of everything now. She wept so loudly that two birds nearly flew off in fright. Just as the others were really in despair, a small door flew open in the trunk of the tree not far below, and a round, moon-like face looked out. "Hey there! What's the matter?" shouted the moon-faced person. "A fellow can't get any sleep at all with that awful noise going on." Fanny stopped crying and looked at Moonface in surprise. I'm crying because I'm frightened of climbing down the tree," she said. I'm sorry I woke you up." Moonface beamed at her. "Have you got any toffee?" he asked. "Toffee?" everyone asked back in surprise. "What do you want toffee for?" "To eat, of course," said Moonface. "I just thought if you had any toffee to give me, I'd let you slide down my slippery slip. You get down to the bottom very quickly that way, you know." "A slide all the way down the faraway tree?" cried Joe, hardly believing his ears. "Good gracious, whoever would have thought of that?" "I thought of it," said Moonface, beaming again, just like a full moon. "I let people use it if they pay me in toffee." "Oh," said the three children, and looked at one another in dismay, for none of them had any toffee. Then Joe shook his head. "We've no toffee," he said, "but I've a bar of chocolate, a bit squashy, but quite nice." "Won't do," said Moonface. "I don't like chocolate. What about the rabbits? Haven't they got any toffee either?" The rabbits turned out their pockets. They had a very curious collection of things, but no toffee. "Sorry," said Moonface, and slammed his door shut. Fanny began to cry again. Joe climbed down to the door and banged on it. "Hi, old Moonface!" he shouted. "I'll bring you some lovely homemade toffee next time I'm up the tree, if you'll let us use your slippery slip." The door flew open again, and Moonface beamed out. "Why didn't you say so before?" he asked. "Come in." One by one, the rabbits and the children climbed down to the door and went in. Moonface's house in the tree was very peculiar. It was one round room, and in the middle of it was the beginning of the slippery slip that ran down the whole trunk of the tree winding round and round like a spiral staircase. Round the top of the slide was a curved bed, a curved table, and 2 curved chairs, made to fit the roundness of the tree trunk. The children were astonished and wished they had time to stay for a while, but Moonface pushed them towards the slide. "You'll want a cushion each," he said. "Hi you, rabbit, take the top one and go first." One of the rabbits took an orange cushion and set it at the top of the slide. He sat down on it, looking a little nervous. "Go on, hurry up," said Moonface. "You don't want to stay all night, do you?" He gave the rabbit a hard push, and the rabbit slid down the slippery slip at a tremendous pace, his whiskers and ears blown backwards. Joe thought it looked like a lovely thing to do. He went next. He took a blue cushion, sat on it at the top of the slide, and pushed off. Down he went on his cushion, his hair streaming backwards. Round and round and round went the slippery slip inside the enormous trunk of the tree. It was quite dark and silent, and lasted a very long time, for the faraway tree was tremendously tall. Joe enjoyed every second. When he came to the bottom, his feet touched a sort of trapdoor in the trunk at the foot, and the trapdoor flew open. Joe shot out and landed on a big tuft of green moss, which was grown there to make a soft landing place. He sat there out of breath. Then he got up quickly, for he didn't want Bessie or Fanny landing on the top of him. Bessie went next. She flew down on a fat pink cushion, gasping for breath, for she went so fast. Then Fanny went on a green cushion, and then the other rabbit. One by one, they shot out of the strange little trapdoor, which closed itself tightly as soon as the slider had gone through. They all sat on the ground, getting their breath and laughing, for it really was funny to shoot down inside a tree on a cushion. Whoever would have thought of such a thing? The rabbits stood up first. "We'd better be going," they said. "So pleased to have met you." They disappeared down the nearest burrow, and the children waved goodbye. Then Joe stood up. "Come on," he said. "We really must get home. Goodness knows what time it is." "Oh, what a lovely way of getting down the faraway tree that was," said Bessie, jumping to her feet. "It was so quick." "I loved it," said Fanny. "I'd like to climb the tree every single day, just so that I could slide down that glorious slippery slip. I say, what do we do with the cushions?" At that moment, a red squirrel, dressed in an old jersey, came out of a hole in the trunk. "Cushions, please," he said. The children gathered them up and handed them to the squirrel one by one. They were getting quite used to hearing animals talk by now. "Are you going to carry all those cushions up the tree to Moonface?" asked Fanny in wonder. The squirrel laughed. "Of course not," he said. "Moonface lets down a rope for them. Look, here it comes." A rope came slipping down between the branches. The squirrel caught the end of it, tied the bundle of cushions firmly onto the rope. He gave 3 tugs, and the rope swung upwards again, taking the cushions with it. "Good idea," said Joe, and then they all turned to go home. They didn't talk much on the way through the enchanted wood, for they were all tired and very busy thinking of the strange and exciting things that had happened that day. They came to the ditch and jumped across. They went down the lane and through their little back gate. By the time they reached the cottage, they were ready to drop with tiredness. Their mother and father were not yet home. Bessie sleepily made some bread and milk. They undressed whilst the milk was heating, and then ate their supper sitting in beds. "I'm not going up the faraway tree again," said Fanny, lying down. "Well, I am," said Joe. "Don't forget we promised old Moonface some homemade toffee. We can climb up to his house, give him the toffee, and then slide down the slippery slip again. We don't need to go into any land at the top of the tree." But Bessie and Fanny were fast asleep, and very soon Joe was too, dreaming of the strange faraway tree and the curious folk who lived in its enormous trunk. Chapter 7. Bessie makes some toffee for Moonface. The children talked about nothing else but the faraway tree and its queer folk for days after their adventure. Bessie said they must certainly keep their promise to take Toffee to Moonface. Promises must never be broken, she said. I will make some toffees if Mother will let me have some treacle. Then, when it's done, you can take it to Moonface, Joe. Mother said they could make toffee on Wednesday when the grocer came and brought their goods. So, on Wednesday, Bessie set to work making the best toffee she could. She set it in a pan on the stove. It cooked beautifully. When it had cooled and was set nice and hard, Bessie broke it up into small pieces. She put them into a paper bag, gave one piece each to the others, and popped one into her own mouth too. I'll have to go at night, I think, said Joe. I shan't get any time off this week, I know. We're so busy with the garden now. So that night, when the moon was shining brightly in the sky overhead, Joe slipped out of bed. Bessie and Fanny woke up and heard him. They hadn't meant to go with him, but when they saw the moonlight shining everywhere, thought of that exciting faraway tree, they felt that they simply couldn't stay behind. Wouldn't you have felt that way too? They dressed quickly and whispered through Joe's door. We're coming too, Joe. Wait for us. Joe waited. Then they all three slipped down the creaky stairs and out into the moonlit garden. The shadows were very black indeed, just like ink. There was no colour anywhere, only just the pale, cold moonlight. Everything looked rather mysterious, and they were soon in the enchanted wood. But dear me, it was quite different now. It was simply alive with people and animals. In the very dark parts of the wood, little lanterns were hung in rows. In the moonlit parts there were no lanterns, and a great deal of chattering was going on. Nobody took any notice of the children at all. Nobody seemed surprised to see them, but the children were most astonished at everything. They stared and stared. There's a marketplace over there, whispered Joe to Bessie. Look, there are necklaces made of painted acorns and brooches made of wild roses. But Bessie was looking at something else, a dance going on in the moonlit dell with fairies and pixies chattering and laughing together. Sometimes, when they were tired of dancing on their feet, partners would fly in the air and dance there in the moonlight. Fanny was watching some elves growing toadstools. As fast as the toadstools grew, an elf laid a cloth on it and put glasses of lemonade and tiny biscuits there. It was all like a strange dream. Oh, I'm glad we came, said Bessie in delight. Who would have thought that the enchanted wood would be like this at night? They wasted a great deal of time looking at everything, but at last they got to the faraway tree. And even here there was a great difference. The whole tree was hung with fairy lights and glittered softly from branch to branch, rather like a very enormous Christmas tree. Joe saw something else. It was a stout rope going from branch to branch for people to hold on to when they wished to go up to the tree. Look at that, he said. It will be much easier to go up tonight. All we'll have to do is just hold on to the rope and pull ourselves up by it. Come on. Other folk and some animals too were going up the tree, not to the land at the top, but to visit their friends who lived in the trunk of the enormous tree. All the doors and windows were open now, and there was a great deal of laughing and talking going on. The children climbed up and up. When they came to the window of the pixie who had been so angry with them last week because they had peeped in, they found that he was in a very good temper now, sitting and smiling at his open window, talking to three owls. But Joe didn't think they had better stop, in case the pixie remembered them and threw water over them again. So on they went, holding on to the thick rope, climbing very easily. They came to Silky's house and called her. She was baking over a small stove. Hello, she said, looking up smiling. So here you are again. Just in time too, because I'm baking pop biscuits. They are most delicious hot. Her silky golden hair stood out round her tiny face, which was red with bacon. Joe took out his bag of toffees. "We're really taking them to Moonface," he said, "but do have one." Silky took one and then gave them 3 hot pop biscuits each. My goodness, how lovely they were, especially when they went pop in the children's mouths. "We mustn't stop, Silky dear," said Bessie. "We've still a long way to go up the tree." "Well, look out for Mother Washalot's washing water again then," said Silky. "She's dreadful at night. She knows there are a lot of people up and down the tree and just loves to soak them with her dirty water." The children went on up. They passed Mr. What's-his-name, still fast asleep and snoring in his chair, and dodged quickly behind a branch when they heard Dame Washalot's water sloshing down. Nobody even got splashed this time. Fanny laughed. "This really is the funniest tree I ever knew," she said. "You simply never know what's going to happen." They pulled themselves up and up by the rope and came at last to the top. They knocked on Moonface's yellow door. "Come in," yelled a voice, and in they went. Moonface was sitting on his curved bed, mending one of his cushions. "Hello," he said. "Did you bring me that toffee you owe me?" "Yes," said Joe, handing him the bag. "There's a lot there, Moonface. Half to pay you for last week's slippery slide, and half to pay you if you let us go down again tonight." "Oh my," said Moonface, looking with great delight into the bag. "What lovely toffee." Bessie, Bessie gave some toffee to Moonface, and he crammed 4 large pieces into his mouth and sucked it with joy. "Is it nice?" said Bessie. Answered Moonface, quite unable to speak properly, for his teeth were stuck together with the toffee. The children laughed. "Is the Roundabout land still at the Faraway tree?" asked Joe. Moonface shook his head. "Ooh," he said. "What land is there now?" asked Fanny. Moonface made a face and screwed up his nose. He said very earnestly. "Oh dear, we shan't be able to get anything out of him at all whilst he's eating toffee," said Bessie. "He'll just ogle away. What a pity. I would have liked to know what strange land was there tonight." "I'll just go and peep," said Joe, jumping up. Moonface looked alarmed. He shook his head and caught hold of Joe. "Ooh," he cried. "It's all right, Moonface. I'm only going to peep," said Joe. "I shan't go into the land." cried Moonface in fright, trying his best to swallow all the toffee so that he could speak properly. Joe didn't listen. He went out of the door with the girls and climbed up the last branch of the faraway tree. What strange land was above it this time? Joe peered up through the dark hole in the cloud, through which a beam of moonlight shone down. He came to the little ladder that ran up the hole in the cloud. He climbed up it. His head poked out into the land at the top. He gave a shout. "Bessie, Fanny, it's a land of ice and snow. There are big white bears everywhere. Oh, do come and look." But then a dreadful thing happened. Something lifted Joe right off the ladder, and he disappeared into the land of ice and snow above the cloud. "Come back, Joe, come back," yelled Moonface, swallowing all his toffee in fright. "You mustn't even look, or the snowman will get you." But Joe was gone. Bessie looked at Moonface in fright and dismay. "What shall we do?" she asked. Chapter 8. Joe and the Snowman. Moonface was most upset to see Joe disappear. I told him, he groaned. "You didn't," sobbed Fanny. "Your mouth was full of toffee, and all you could say was ooh, ooh, ooh. And how could we know what that meant?" "Where is Joe now?" asked Bessie, quite pale with shock. Yes, indeed. Where was Joe? Someone had lifted him right off the ladder and up into the land of ice and snow. And there, Strangely enough, the moon and the sun were in the sky at the same time, one at one side and the other the opposite, both shining with a pale light. Joe shivered, for it was very cold. He looked to see what had lifted him off the ladder, and saw in front of him a big, strange creature, a snowman. He was just like the snowman Joe had so often made in the winter time, round and fat and white, with an old hat on his head and a pipe in his mouth. "This is luck," said the snowman in a soft, snowy sort of voice. "I've been standing by that hole for days, waiting for a seal to come up, and you came." "Oh," said Joe, remembering that seals came up to breathe through holes in the ice. "That wasn't a water hole. That was the hole that led down the Faraway tree. I want to go back, please." "The hole has closed up," said the snowman. Joe looked, and to his great dismay, he saw that the thick layer of ice formed over the hole, so thick that he knew perfectly well he could never break through it. "Whatever shall I do now?" he said. "Just what I tell you," said the snowman with a grin. "This is splendid. In this dull and silent land there is nothing but polar bears, seals, and penguins. I have often wanted someone to talk to." "How did you get here?" asked Joe, wrapping his coat firmly around him, for he was bitterly cold. "Ah," said the snowman, "that's a long story. I was made up by some children long ago, and when they had finished me, they laughed at me and threw stones at me to break me up. So that night I crept here and made myself king. But what's the point of being king if you've only bears and things to talk to? What I want is a jolly good servant who can talk my language, and now you've come." "But I don't want to be your servant," said Joe indignantly. "Nonsense," said the snowman, and he gave Joe a push that nearly sent him over. Then, on big, flat snow feet, he moved forward to where there was a low wall of snow. "Make me a good house," he said. "I don't know how to," said Joe. "Oh, just cut blocks off this stiff, icy snow and build them one on top of the other," said the snowman. "When you've finished, I'll give you a fur coat to wear. Then you won't shiver so much." Joe didn't see that he could do anything but obey, so he picked up a spade that was lying by the wall and began to cut big bricks of the frozen snow. When he had cut about 20, he stopped and placed them one on top of another till one side of the roundhouse was made. Then he began to cut snow bricks again, wondering all the time how in the world he would ever be able to escape from this strange land. Joe had often built little snow houses of soft snow in his garden at home during the winter. Now he made a big one with proper snow bricks and blocks. He quite enjoyed it, though he did wish the girls were there too. When he had finished and made a nice rounded roof, the snowman came shuffling up. "Very nice," he said. "Very nice indeed. I can just get in, I think." He squeezed his big snow body inside and threw out a fur coat for Joe, made of white polar bear skin. Joe put it on, very thankful. Then he tried to squeeze in after the snowman, for he wanted to be out of the cold, icy wind. But he was so squashed between the snowman and the walls of the snow house that he could hardly breathe. "Don't push so," said the snowman disagreeably. "Move up." "I can't," gasped poor Joe. He felt quite certain that he would be pushed right out of the snow hut through a hole in the wall. Just then there came a curious grunt at the doorway. The snowman called out at once. "Is that you, Furry? Take this boy to your home under the ice. He's a nuisance here. He keeps squashing me." Joe looked up to see who Furry was, and he saw a great white bear looking in. The bear had a stupid but kind look on his face. "Oomph," said the bear, and pulled Joe out into the open air. Joe knew it was no use to struggle. Nobody could get away from a bear as big as that. But the bear was certainly kindly. "Oomph," he said to Joe with a loud grunting noise. "I don't know what you mean," said Joe. The bear said no more. He just took Joe along with him, half carrying the little boy, for Joe found the way very slippery indeed. They came to a hole that led under the ice and snow. The bear pushed Joe down it, and to Joe's enormous surprise, he found there was a big room underneath, with 5 bears there, big and little. It was quite warm there too. Joe was astonished, for there was no fire, of course. "Oomph," said all the bears politely. "Oomph," said Joe. That pleased the bears very much indeed. They came and shook paws with Joe very solemnly and oomphed all over him. Joe liked the look of the bears much more than he liked the look of the snowman. He thought perhaps they might help him to escape from this silly land of ice and snow. "Could you please tell me the way back to the faraway tree?" he asked the bears politely and clearly. The bears looked at one another and then oomphed at Joe. It was quite clear that they didn't understand a word he said. "Never mind," said Joe with a sigh, and made up his mind to put up with things till he could see a way to escape. The snowman was a great nuisance. No sooner did Joe settle himself down for a nap, leaning his head against the big warm body of a bear, than there came a call from the snowman. "Hey, boy, come here and play dominoes with me." So Joe had to go and play dominoes. And as the snowman wouldn't let him come into the hut because he said he was squashed, Joe had to sit at the doorway and play, and he nearly froze to bits. Then another time, just as he was eating a nice bit of fried fish that one of the bears had kindly cooked in oil for him, the snowman shouted to him to come and make a window in his house. And Joe had to hurry off and cut a sheet of clear ice to fit into one side of the snow house for a window. Really, that snowman was a perfect nuisance. "I wish to goodness I'd never peeped into this silly land," thought Joe 100 times. "It's a good thing the bears are so nice to me. I only wish they could say something else besides oomph." Joe wondered what Bessie and Fanny were doing. Were they very upset that he didn't come back? Would they go home and tell their father and mother what had happened? Bessie and Fanny were upset. They were in a great fright too. It had been dreadful to see poor Joe disappear through the cloud like that. Moonface looked very solemn too. He could speak quite well now that he'd swallowed all of his toffee. "We must rescue him," he said, his face shining like the full moon. "How?" asked the girls. "I must think," said Moonface, and he shut his eyes. His big head swelled up with his thinking. He opened his eyes and nodded his head. "We'll go to Goldilocks and the 3 bears," he said. "Her bears know the bears in the land of ice and snow. She might be able to help Joe that way." "But where does Goldilocks live?" asked Bessie in wonder. "I thought she was just a fairy tale." "Oh, good gracious, no," said Moonface. "Come on, we'll have to catch the train." "What train?" asked Fanny in astonishment. "Oh, wait and see," said Moonface. "Hurry now, go down the slippery slip and wait for me at the bottom." Chapter 9. The House of the 3 Bears. Bessie took a cushion, put it at the top of the slide and pushed off. Down she went. Whizz! She shot to the bottom, flew out of the trapdoor and landed on the cushion of moss. She had hardly got up before Fanny flew out of the trapdoor too. "You know, that slippery slip is the greatest fun," said Bessie. "I'd like to do that all day long." "Yes, if only we didn't have to climb all the way up the tree first," said Fanny. The trapdoor flew open and out shot Moonface on a yellow cushion. He put the 3 cushions together, whistled to the red squirrel, who looked after them, and threw them to him. Then he turned to the waiting girls. "There's a train at midnight," he said. "We shall have to hurry." The wood was still bright with moonlight. The 3 of them hurried between the trees. Suddenly, Bessie heard the chuffing of a train, and she and Fanny stopped in surprise. They saw a small train winding in and out of the trees, looking for all the world like a clockwork train made big. The engine even had a key still in its side. There was a small station near. Moonface caught hold of the girl's hands and ran to it. The train was standing quite still there. The carriages had tin doors and windows which didn't open just like those of a clockwork train. Bessie tried her hardest to open a door, but it was no use. The train whistled. It was anxious to be off. "Don't you know how to get on this train?" asked Moonface with a laugh. "You are sillies. You'll just slide the roof off." As he spoke, he pushed at the roof, and it slid off like the roof of a clockwork train's carriage. "I believe this is just like a clockwork train made big," said Fanny, climbing over the side of the carriage and getting in at the roof. "I never saw such a funny train in my life." They all got in. Moonface couldn't seem to slide the roof on again properly, so he stood up inside the carriage, and when the train went off, Bessie and Fanny, who couldn't possibly see out of the tin windows, stood. They stood up and looked out the roof instead. They did look funny. At the next station, which was called Gollywog Station, 3 gollywogs got into their carriage and stared at them very hard. One was so like Bessie's own golly at home that she couldn't help staring back. The second station was called Crosspatch Station, and standing on the platform were 3 of the grossest looking old women that the girls had ever seen. One of them got into their carriage, and the 3 gollywogs at once got out and climbed into the next one. "Move up," said the old crosspatch lady angrily to Moonface. He moved up. The crosspatch was an uncomfortable person to travel with. She grumbled all the time, and her basket, which was full of prickly rose sprays, kept bumping into poor Fanny. Here we are," sang out Moonface when they got to the next station, and the 3 of them got out gladly, leaving the crosspatch grumbling away all to herself. The station was called Bears Station, and there were a great many teddy bears about, some brown, some pink, some blue, and some white. When they wanted to talk to one another, they kept pressing themselves in the middle, where their growl was, and then they could talk quite well. Fanny wanted to giggle when she saw them doing this. It did look so funny. Please, could you tell me the way to the 3 bears' house?" Moonface asked a blue teddy bear politely. The bear pressed himself in the middle and answered in a nice growly voice. "Up the lane and down the lane and round the lane." "Thank you," said Moonface. "It sounds a bit funny to me," said Bessie doubtfully. "Not at all," said Moonface, leading them up a little honeysuckle lane. "Here we are, going up a lane, and now you see it goes downhill, so we're going to go down, and presently we will turn a corner and go around the lane." He was right. They went up, and then down, and then around. And there in front of them, tucked into a woody corner, was the dearest, prettiest little house the girls had ever seen. It was covered with pink roses from top to bottom, and its tiny windows winked in the moonlight as if they had eyes. Moonface knocked at the door. A sleepy voice cried, Come in." Moonface opened the door, and they all went in. There was a table in front of them, and on it were 3 steaming bowls of porridge, and round it were 3 chairs, one big, one middle-sized, and one tiny. "It's the house of the 3 bears, all right," whispered Bessie excitedly. "It was just like seeing a fairy story come true." "In here," said a voice from another room. Moonface went in with Bessie and Fanny. The other room was a small bedroom with a big bed in it, a middle-sized bed, and a tiny cot. In the big bed lay a large brown bear. In the middle-sized one was a fat mother bear, and in the cot was a most adorable baby bear with the bluest eyes the girls had ever seen. "Where's Goldilocks?" asked Moonface. "Gone shopping," said the father bear. Where does she sleep when she's here? Asked Bessie, looking around. And does she always live with you now? Always, said Father Bear, putting on his big nightcap. She looks after us well. There's a market on tonight in the Enchanted Wood, and she's gone off to see if she can buy some porridge cheap. As for where she sleeps, well, she just chooses any of our beds, you know. And we cuddle up together then. But she likes Baby Bear's bed best because it's so soft and warm. She did in the story, said Franny. What story? Asked Mother Bear. Well, the story of the three bears, said Fanny. Never heard of it, said the three bears all together, which really seemed rather extraordinary to Bessie and Fanny. They didn't like to ask any more questions after that. Here's Goldilocks now, said the Mother Bear. The sound of a little high voice could be heard coming nearer and nearer. The baby bear sprang out of his cot and ran to the door in delight. A pretty little girl with long, curling, golden hair picked him up and hugged him. Hello, darling, she said. Have you been a good bear? Then she saw Bessie, Fanny, and Moonface and stared at them in surprise. Who are you? She said. Moonface explained about Joe and how he had gone to the land of ice and snow, where the big white bears lived. I'm afraid the magic snowman will make him a prisoner there, said Moonface, and he'll have to live with the white bears. Could you get your three bears to come with us and ask the white bears to let Joe go free, Goldilocks? But I don't know the way, said Goldilocks. We do, said Father Bear suddenly. The white bears are cousins of ours, Moonface. If you can help us with a bit of magic, we can visit the land of ice and snow in a few minutes. Good gracious, said Bessie, most astonished. But it's ever so far away, right at the top of the Faraway tree. That doesn't matter, said the Father Bear. He took down a large jar from the mantelpiece and filled it with water. He put into it a yellow powder and stirred it with a magpie's beak and white feather. Moonface put his hands into the water and began to sing a string of strange words that Bessie and Fanny felt quite trembly. Humbly dumbly tumbly die, cumbly dumbly tumbly tie. The water bubbled. It rose to the top of the jar. It overflowed and ran onto the floor. It turned to ice beneath their feet. A cold wind filled the little house, and everyone shivered. Then Bessie looked out of the window, and what she saw there filled her with such amazement that she couldn't say a word, but just pointed. Fanny looked too, and whatever do you think? Outside lay nothing but ice and snow. They were in the same land as Joe. Though how this had happened, neither Bessie nor Fanny could make out. We're there, said Moonface, taking his hands out of the jar and drying them on his red handkerchief. Can you lend us coats, bears? We shall be cold. The Mother Bear handed them thick coats out of a cupboard. They put them on. The bears already had thick fur and did not need anything extra. Now we go and find Joe, said Moonface. Come on, bears, you've got to help. Chapter 10. The Battle of the Bears. Goldilocks, the three bears, the girls, and Moonface all went out of the little cottage. How strange it seemed to see roses blossoming over the walls when ice and snow lay all around. The thing is, where do we go to find the polar bears? Said Goldilocks. Over there towards the sun, said the Father Bear. Bessie and Fanny were surprised to see both the moon and the sun shining in the sky. They followed the Father Bear, slipping and sliding and holding on to one another. It was very cold, and their noses and toes felt as though they were freezing. Suddenly, they saw the little snow house that Joe had built for the magic snowman. Look, said the Father Bear, we'd better make for that. But before they got there, a big white figure squeezed itself out of the snow house and saw them. It was the magic snowman. As soon as he saw the three bears and the others, he began to shout loudly in a windy, snowy voice, Enemies! Enemies! Hi, bears! Come and send off the enemies! "We're not enemies," yelled Moonface, and Goldilocks ran forward to show the snowman that she was a little girl and not an enemy at all. But Moonface pulled her back. He didn't trust that old snowman. The snowman bent his big fat body down and picked up great hands full of snow. He threw one at Goldilocks. She ducked down and it passed over her and hit her and the baby bear. "Ouch!" he said, and sat down in a hurry. Then everything happened at once. A crowd of white polar bears hurried out of the underground home to help the snowman, and soon the air was full of flying snowballs. The snow was hard, and the balls hurt when they hit anyone. It wasn't a bit of good to the girls shouting that they were friends and not enemies. Nobody heard them. And soon there was a fierce battle going on. "Oh dear!" gasped Bessie, trying her best to throw straight. "This is dreadful. We shall never rescue Joe by behaving like this." But there really didn't seem anything else to be done. After all, if people are fighting you, you can't do much but defend yourself, and the three bears and the girls were having 5 snowballs at a time being thrown at them. Smack, thud, biff, squash. The snowballs burst as they hit, and soon there was a great noise of angry "oomphs" from the white bears and "ooches" from the teddy bears, and yells from the children and screeches from Moonface, who acted as if he were mad, hopping about and yelling and kicking up the snow as well as throwing it. His big fat face was a fine target for snowballs, and he was hit more than anybody else. Poor Moonface. Now, whilst this fierce battle was going on, where do you suppose Joe was? As soon as he had heard the cry of "Enemies! Enemies!" he had hidden in a corner, for he didn't want to be mixed up in any fight. When he saw the white bears going out, and he was left all alone, he began at once to think of escaping. He crept to the hole that led above ground. The battle was some way off, so Joe did not see that the enemies were really his own friends. If he had, he would have gone to join them at once. "What a terrible noise they're making," he thought. "It sounds like a battle between gorillas and bears to me. I'm not going near them. I'd be eaten up or something. I shall just run hard the opposite way and hope I'll meet someone to help me." So Joe, dressed in his bearskin and looking just like a little white bear himself, crept off over the ice and snow, not seen by anyone. He ran as soon as he thought he was out of sight. He ran and he ran and he ran, but he met nobody. Not a soul was to be seen. Only a lonely seal lay on a shelf of ice, but even he dived below as soon as he saw Joe. And then Joe stopped in the greatest astonishment and stared as if his eyes would fall out of his head. He had come to the cottage of the 3 bears, standing all alone in the middle of the ice and snow. And, of course, its roses were still blooming round it, scenting all the air. "I'm dreaming," said Joe. "I simply must be dreaming. A cottage with roses here in the middle of the snow. Well, I shall go and see who lives there. Perhaps they would give me something to eat and let me rest, for I am hungry and tired." He knocked at the door. There was no answer. He opened the door and went in. How he stared! There was no one to be seen at all, but on the table stood 3 bowls of steaming porridge, one big, one middle-sized, and one small. It was rather dark, so Joe lighted a big candle on the table. Then he sank down into the biggest chair. But it was far too big, and he got up again. He sat down in the next sized chair, but that too was piled up with cushions, and he got up to sit in the smallest chair. That was just right. And Joe settled down comfortably, but alas, his weight was too much for it, and the chair broke to bits beneath him. "Bother," said Joe, getting up again. "I do hope the people won't be too cross with me." He looked at the delicious porridge. He tasted the porridge in the biggest bowl. It was too much too hot, and he burnt his tongue. He tasted the next bowl, but that was far too sweet. But when he tasted the porridge in the little bowl, It was just right, so Joe ate it all up. Then he felt so sleepy that he thought he really must rest. So he went into the bedroom and lay down on the biggest bed. But it was far too big, so he tried the middle-sized one. That was too soft and went down in the middle. So Joe lay down on the cot, and that was so small and warm and comfortable that he fell fast asleep. All this time, the battle was going on. The snowman was so big and the polar bears were so fierce that very soon the teddy bears, the children, and Moonface were driven backwards. Then a snowstorm blew up, and everything was black. Moonface called out an alarm. Bears, Goldilocks, Bessie, Fanny, take hold of each other's arms at once and don't let go. One of us might easily be lost in the storm. Everyone at once took hands. The snow blew into their faces and they could see nothing. Bending forwards, they began to walk carefully away from the white bears, who had stopped fighting now and were trying to find out where their enemies were. Anything, said Moonface. We don't want the white bears to hear us, in case they take us prisoners. They might not listen to the teddy bears. Move off, and we'll look for some sort of shelter till the storm is over. They were all very miserable. They were cold, rather frightened, and quite lost. They stumbled over the snow, keeping hold of one another's hands firmly. They went on, and suddenly Goldilocks shook off Moonface's hand and pointed in front of them. A light, she said in astonishment. Everyone stopped. I say, it's our cottage, shrieked the baby bear in surprise and delight. But who's inside? Someone must have lit the candle. They all stared at the lighted window. Who was inside the cottage? Could it be the snowman had found it? Or the polar bears? Was it an enemy inside? Or a friend? Whew! Blew the wind, and the snowflakes fell thickly on everyone as they stood there wondering. "Oh," shivered Moonface, "we shall get dreadful cold standing out here in the snow. Let's go in and find out who's there." So the father bear opened the door, and one by one they all trooped in, looking round the empty room, half afraid. And that is the end of part 1. We are going to take a break now, so I'm going to end this video, and I'm going to be back in about 5 to 10 minutes with part 2. So if you'd like to continue on the journey of the Enchanted Wood, we are going to keep going today. Come back for part 2 momentarily. I'll see you then. Bye.